Hey, what's going on everybody? So have you ever heard like a clanking noise or a squeaking noise coming from the front end of your Mercedes Benz S Class by the lower wheels? Chances are it's your lower ball joint. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to replace it. Let's get started. All right, everybody. So the first thing we're going to do is remove this side paneling right here. And that's going to give us access to this thrust arm bolt. And we're just going to take a ratchet and a wrench, and once we break loose the bolt and the nut, then we can switch the ratchet to the inside and the wrench to the outside, and that way it'll just allow us to make sure we can really remove that nut. Sometimes the ratchet will get stuck if it's too big. So just go ahead and remove that nut and then pull out the long bolt, and make sure you just keep everything together, the bolt and the washer and everything like that. You kind of want to just make sure you don't lose them. And if the bolt is stuck, you can remove the ball joint first, but I decided to just start with the bolt that connects to the chassis. But yeah, you can see here I'm removing the nut for the ball joint. And then you don't want to remove the nut entirely, you just want to loosen it. And then lower the nut down until it's flush with the threads at the end. So then we'll take our ball joint separator and we'll go ahead and set that up and get it nice and tight. And you can just see here that I was going to get the hammer and it just popped while I was getting the hammer, and I was like, what's going on? But if it is a little stuck, you can use a hammer to just kind of break it loose when the ball joint separator is in place. So we'll just go ahead and loosen that up now, and that bolt should come right out. So you can see there, boom, really easy. So if you want, you can start with the ball joint, but like I said, keep everything together just like that, and set it off to the side. And then go ahead and pull that thrust arm out of the way so that we can continue on and get that ball joint removed. And so we'll just set it down, and then next what we're going to do is we're going to take off, or we're going to remove the locking set pins or set screws for the air suspension strut that connects to the control arm. And you want to go slow when you are loosening these set pins or set screws, because they have Loctite on them and they can be pretty tight, and you don't want to strip anything like the head or the threads or anything like that. And so just be very, very careful. Take your time when loosening them, and they will come out. And you can see there all the Loctite. Okay, so now we have our sway bar link, our end link here. And we'll just go ahead and remove that as well. This is pretty tough, so make sure you have a pretty long breaker bar to remove that. And once we have that loose, just go ahead and remove that nut. Now, to get access to the lower control arm that connects to the chassis, we're going to have to remove these panels. And if you've seen my other videos, then you've already learned how to remove the panels. So let's just get right into removing this bolt for the lower control arm. And it's pretty much the same as the thrust arm. It's going to be the same exact process. We're just going to go ahead and break loose the bolt, loosen that nut, and then remove the bolt, and make sure we keep everything together. And something that I like to do is keep this bolt separate from the thrust arm bolt, even though they're the same. So now we're going to mark that sway bar link rod that connects to the control arm, because you're going to need a 12mm hex wrench to loosen this rod here, this connecting link, so that you can pull it out of the bolt that's connected, or the ball joint that's connected to the control arm. And you can see right there. So by marking it, you can put it back in the same exact place when you tighten it. And now we have our control arm separated, and we have access to that ball joint nut right there. So let's go ahead and remove that. And once we get it loose, it's going to be the same process. We're going to just take the thread up to the top, but we're not going to remove that bolt or the nut. and we're going to get our ball joint separator in there nice and snug, and then we're just going to repeat the same process. And if we learned anything from the first process, we're going to make sure that we're careful, and as you can see right there, it popped. So now we can go ahead and remove our lower control arm just like that. Pretty simple. So now you can see that ball joint, it is pretty worn out. I mean, you can see I'm moving it right there with my hand. So now we're going to take our ball joint removal tool, and this is the most handiest tool ever. So definitely pick this up. I'll put a link in the description where you can buy it. It's worth its weight in gold, I guess you can say. So here you can see I'm setting it up, putting the big cap over the top, small on the bottom, and I'm using an air impact driver. But if you have an electric impact driver, you can use that. I'm using air, or you can use your hand. It'll just take a really long time if you're using hand tools, and I highly recommend a large breaker bar. But if you can, use a air gun or a electric pneumatic gun or electric impact driver. So there you can see the ball joint is out. It's removed. It looks worn and beat. And so now let's go ahead and put in a new one. So we'll just clean out any kind of like residue or maybe like markings in it, so you know, like little debris, so that the new one doesn't get stuck on anything. And we'll go ahead and pop it in, and we're going to set it up and make sure that it is even. We do not want to have this ball joint going in at an angle. That could cause a lot of damage. So make sure it is level, even when you sit it into the slot there. So now we're going to use our ball joint tool again, but this time to install the ball joint. And we're just going to take our time, go a little slow. If you want, you can add a little bit of lubrication between the ball joint and the steering knuckle, just so that it slides in a little easier. But pretty much we're just going to go and we're going to take it down until that lip is flush with the steering knuckle. Right there you can see it going down, and then you'll see it'll just kind of stop, and then you'll know that it's pretty much installed. But you don't want to just keep using that impact driver, or you could damage the ball joint. So you can see right there, there's no gap. That means we're good. So let's go ahead and start putting everything back together now. So we'll just start with our lower control arm there, and get the nut on there like that so that it doesn't pop off. And then from there, once we have that nice and tight, snug at least, then we can use a hand tool or wrench, and then we'll just go ahead and torque this nut down to 50 Newton meters, and then after that we're going to turn it 60 degrees. There's a lot of interesting torque requirements for suspension and all that kind of stuff. So make sure you turn it to 60 degrees. You can break that down into 10 degrees, but right there, I did show you a jack stand, and with the jack stand, it's just a little pro tip to use a jack stand so you can kind of save your arms and lift everything up so that it slides in place a little easier. You can see here I'm kind of struggling a little bit. That's because I didn't use the jack stand just yet, not until later, or should I say the hydraulic jack. My apologies. So here I use the sway bar link just to kind of hold everything up, just to get that bolt back in. You can see I'm kind of fighting there, but if you use a jack, a hydraulic jack, and kind of raise it up by the brake caliper or the brake rotor, then it'll make life a lot easier. So, but you can see here my sheer willpower just kind of got the job done. So there I set the bolt up, and so now you'll notice that I'm not going to torque anything down from here on out, except for the set screws that goes into the air suspension. But all of the suspension components, aside from the ball joint, I'm not torquing down, because we're going to torque that down under load or curb weight. And what that means is we're going to sit the car down as if it was sitting on the ground. We don't want to torque anything down while the car is up in the air like this, because it doesn't simulate actual driving conditions. So now you can see here I'm putting that bolt back into the thrust arm that connects to the chassis, and you can see in the top right hand corner that's just another viewing angle on how I'm installing that bolt. So we'll put our washer back on and then make sure we get our nut on there as well. And remember, once again, we're not going to tighten anything down just yet. All we're doing pretty much is setting everything up. So again, just going to tighten things down hand tight just so that they don't fall out. And there you can see I'm using my hydraulic jack, and I'm using my hydraulic jack, and that's pretty much to get the set pin inside of the air suspension, so that I can get those locking screws, those set screws in there. And I'm torquing the set screws down to 20 Newton meters on both sides. Make sure you torque them down on both sides. And after that, we're going to go ahead and put our sway bar link rod back onto our lower control arm. Okay, so we can torque down the sway bar link rod because that doesn't affect any of the suspension in terms of curb weight. Now here's the 12 millimeter hex wrench that you're gonna need to cut because it needs to get behind that link rod, and you're gonna have to just hand tighten it as much as you can without over tightening. You want to cut your 12 millimeter Allen wrench so that it can fit behind the sway bar link connector, because if it's the standard size, it won't fit unless you remove your entire sway bar. So in order to make the adjustment without removing your entire sway bar, then you're going to have to cut it. So you can use a hacksaw, you can use a bandsaw, you can use a grinder, but the most effective way is to use a hacksaw. The most cost-effective way is to use a hacksaw and just spend a little bit of time cutting. And I'll give you the measurement right now for the length that you're going to need. You can see that that length is roughly 32 millimeters, or 1.266 inches. So that's the length that you need in order to get behind, have enough clearance to get behind the link connector. So if you want, you can cut just a little bit longer just to make sure that you don't cut it too short, and then you can always grind it down or cut more later. Now we can set our car down on some type of ramp. In this case, I added some wood just to get a little bit more height, but this is going to be our simulated curb weight, or I guess you could say, yes, the curb weight, like as if the car is sitting on the ground. And now we're going to go ahead and tighten down this bolt, this thrust arm bolt, and torque everything down as well. So you can see there it's going to be 80 Newton meters, and then you're going to turn it 120 degrees after 80 Newton meters. So if you don't have the space for 120 degrees, you can always just break that up. You know, you can divide it into however many parts you want to equal 120 degrees. That's something to consider. But if you have the space, then go ahead and just do one turn of 120 degrees, and you'll be good. And the same for the lower control arm. You can see there from another viewing angle, it's going to be the same torque spec with 120 degrees. And now we're just going to go ahead and check to make sure everything is tight, because there was a lot of things that we had to tighten, and we want to make sure that nothing is loose before we start driving the car. So here you can see I'm just going over everything, making sure with everyone out there watching that we have tightened down everything. We're doing our checks, we're double checking, make sure everything's good, and don't forget, or should I say, please remember to put the panels back on and install all of the screws that goes into the panels, and make sure that those are in there. And then once that's good to go, you can see there that's the simulation for the car being on the ground and the suspension is all nice and loaded and torqued down and everything looks good.